In 2015, the American Nurses Association revised its code of ethics, and this time they included something that talked about the expectation of nursing behavior. It's required that we create an ethical environment and a culture of civility and kindness, treating colleagues and coworkers, employees, students, and others with dignity and respect. And of course, nurses can have the same expectations afforded back to them. The ANA went on to say, speaking about the issue of disruptive behavior, that to eliminate harmful actions and actions not taken in the workplace requires the existence of disruptive behavior first be acknowledged. In other words, we have not been paying enough attention to the elephant in the room, and we certainly cannot effect a change if we're not willing to acknowledge that an issue exists. The scope of the problem, according to the literature, suggests that about 50% of nurses report being on the other side or the target of bullying or chronic incivility. Now, that doesn't mean that 50% of the staff is engaging in this behavior, but that 50% of the staff has reported being the target of this behavior. And I can say that in the last 5, 6+ years that I have been coaching on the road at various nursing organizations and other professional venues, what I'm hearing is that about 85% of the staff consistently shows up for work, ready, willing to deliver good, quality, safe care, that they're enthusiastic about their job, they're enthusiastic about the care that they're rendering, and they still get satisfaction out of being a professional caregiver. Good news, that's the majority of the people who we are working with. The other side of that is that I am hearing from nurse leaders that constitutes another 15% who come under the umbrella of disruptive behavior. And within that 15%, we can further break it down into about 10% who chronically engage in chronic incivility, which leaves then 5% of the staff actually engaging in a behavior that we would classify as bullying. Now, I guess this is encouraging in the sense that 85% of people are really looking to show up and do a good job each and every day. But what concerns me is that the people who are disruptive are obviously in the minority, yet we seem to be ineffective in addressing and effectively changing and shifting this number so that we have even less people who are chronically disruptive. You'd think that we could get our hearts and minds around 5% of anything at this point in our leadership and professional careers, yet the 5% of people who are engaging in bullying seem to be our biggest challenge. So this is an amazing statement, but if we're honest with ourselves, we know that there is a silent majority, often trying to cope with the attitudes and the behaviors of the few, and that the few are causing a tremendous amount of disruption and probably monopolizing a disproportionate amount of your leadership time in order to try to correct or manage effectively. If we're going to create a culture of civility, then we have to renew our commitment not just to address bullying and incivility, but we have to renew our commitment to the 85%, the majority, who are showing up each and every day, trying to do their best, and are waiting for us to take definitive action to really champion the whole issue of creating a healthy work environment. So the Workplace Bullying Institute has done a very good job in trying to outline some things so that we can get our minds and hearts around it. They say that bullying is a pattern, and that's an important concept, that anybody can have an off day. But someone who is engaging in bullying is engaging in shadow behavior that is often behind the scenes, and there is a pattern to that abusive behavior. That behavior can be horizontal or it can be vertical, but it's going to be consistent. And it can manifest in a variety of ways. It can be verbal abuse. It can be nonverbal, meaning threatening, intimidating, but otherwise humiliating. It can be that someone's causing work interference or sabotaging someone else's actions, and that this is really going to impact somebody else's work performance and reputation. And they recognize that there are about 5 categories to this. There are threats to professional status, there's a threat to professional standing and reputation, there is a forcing into isolation, and at times it's even overwork with impossible deadlines can also be a manifestation of a form of bullying. The American Nurses Association in 2012 actually gave us some examples of what they consider to be acts of bullying. And I really do want to recommend that if you're recrafting your policies and your procedures, that you work these examples into them. So the ANA says that being yelled at and screamed at in front of others is bullying. Being accused of an error or being made a scapegoat to someone else's error is, of course, bullying. Being the subject of gossip or perhaps rumors that are designed to undermine the authority or the credibility of someone or destroy their reputation altogether. And then, of course, being sabotaged, however that shows up. And having key information withheld, especially if it's going to impact job performance, or more importantly, how you manage a patient's care. Did you not have the right information to keep that patient safe? So the impact of workplace bullying is really something that can't be understated. And we're really starting to see it creep into a lot of the data and metrics that we are monitoring. But on an individual level, it certainly exacerbates the stress and demands of an already demanding profession. And it really contributes to the overall sense of, compassion fatigue that someone can develop, leading to what we would otherwise call burnout. And the symptoms of that compassion fatigue can manifest as a loss of self-esteem. No adult wants to feel that they're at the mercy of another adult. Disruption in sleep patterns, helplessness leading to a sense of depression, and other symptoms that are very consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. From an organizational standpoint, clearly there's going to be lower productivity and lower patient and family satisfaction scores. They're going to be all over your metrics to, showing that, something is definitely wrong with that team and we better do something to figure it out. And a class in customer service is not going to be the answer. Drilling down to what is undermining the sense of a healthy work environment will be. So you're going to have lower staff commitment and engagement to any of your organizational initiatives if the workplace is indeed unhealthy, and you're going to be experiencing higher absenteeism, greater turnover rates, and we all know how that impacts staffing, quality, and of course morale. From the patient's viewpoint though, here's where the Joint Commission steps in, and they're really trying to raise our awareness about what incivility and bullying or chronic distraction from disruptive behavior can cause for the patient. And that is, there is a reluctance to report potential error, so the error then occurs. Now, we've had the National Patient Safety Goals in place for well over, 10 or 12 years now, and yet the incidence of patient events, untoward patient events is increasing over the years. So we know that, for whatever reason, and usually bullying is at the heart of this, there is a reluctance to speak up when you say something, when you see something, and we all know that's the opposite of what we need them to do. Therefore, the consequence is there is increased harm and errors and infections and, of course, cost. And ultimately, we're going to drive talent away from the organization and perhaps from the bedside. If people aren't leaving the bedside in your organization, perhaps they're going to leave the profession altogether. But you can see that this is the tip of the iceberg. And we all know in our hearts that this is an issue whose time has come, and we have to really and clearly address it. Bullying is an intended behavior. I am often asked, well, do they know what's happening? Do they know what they're doing? And the answer is yes. Bullies know what they're doing. Uncivil people know what they're doing, and they have to be held accountable for their actions. There is research back in 2006 by Malcolm Lewis and Stevenson and Company, and it was demonstrating that bullies knew exactly what they were doing. And in fact, the people who were the intended targets of the bullying reported that they thought this was what they had to put up with, almost like hazing rights when you join a sorority or fraternity. Ridiculous. This is not, being bullied cannot be the rite of passage into a profession. So we know that bullying is not just intended, it's predictable. And at some point in our professional careers, we all were trained in the cycle of abusive behavior. Whether you learned about that from domestic violence classes that you took, or child abuse or elder abuse classes that you took, we all learned that abusive behavior is cyclical. All right, there's going to be an event, and the person's going to be called out on that event. And that person is going to then express remorse and promise reform, and follow that up with a period of behavior that is repentant and perhaps even overly kind to the target of their abuse. But we know that they can't sustain it, and that over time that abuser is going to become irritable about something, and the potential target is probably going to get anxious and maybe even over-solicitous, trying to play down, trying to make sure that everything is going smoothly, that they don't get irritated. But nonetheless, that person will respond to a trigger, and the abuser will then, of course, be abusive again. This is exactly what happens in bullying. Exactly. All right, their inability to have any self-awareness, let alone empathy for how the other person feels, does not allow them to self-manage appropriately so that they can sustain any promises of doing it better tomorrow. In order to address this, there has to be an absolute partnership with administration and human resources. There has to be a synergistic relationship between you and them. I have to caution you, please do not think that you can manage the behavior of a bully or chronically disruptive person alone. I liken that to a Joan of Arc moment. I liken that to, Joan rallied the troops and she went out and she saved France, and that was terrific and wonderful, and she did a great job, yay, yay, Joan. And then we know how that story ended, don't we? Don't do it. You cannot manage this alone. You have to incorporate your administrative professionals and your human resource professionals to make sure that you are in alignment with, first of all, the law, because sometimes some of these acts of bullying can actually be acts that are not consistent with human resource laws as we know it, and they have to be reported to the authorities. You want to make sure that you have that type of communication, and that when there is an event, that you're reporting this event, that there seems to be an escalation of someone's behavior and people are being targeted. You want to report that early so that you can have the appropriate sit-down necessary for HR and administration to come to an agreed-upon approach of how to go forward, so that you are speaking with common language and that you're anticipating the fact this person is going to be knocking on a lot of doors, making a lot of complaints about the person who's trying to hold them accountable. And administration and human resources, while having to have a sensitive ear for any grain of truth that might be there, has to know that this is part of how this rolls, so that there is support for what you are about to do and guidance so that you do it correctly. Okay, everyone needs to speak in a unified manner. Investigate situations. They need to be completely done the way that they're outlined in your policies and procedures. If there are interviews that need to happen, you can conduct them with HR, or HR can conduct them alone. Whatever your policy and procedure states that you need to do is exactly what you should do. And then, of course, effectively addressing bullying is a coordinated approach. All right, each member of the team needs to be committed and in sync and on point with the same message. And they have to know that this is not just going to be episodic, that this approach to trying to regain a sense of civility is going to be ongoing and can take weeks and months of ongoing effort and commitment to this management process in order to be effective. So the process is going to require patience and consistency and understanding that the team it's got to have a coordinated effort, and understanding that, unfortunately, especially when it comes to bullying, that the likelihood that the bully is actually going to make a change that's sustained over time is low, and that it may lead to termination. And if it does, if that dire consequence does happen, it's not the failure of your team, it's that person's choice to not align with the missions and values of the organization, to not align with what is needed to create a healthy work environment and a safe environment for our patients and their families. And you have to make your peace with the fact that you are not trying to make a victim of someone, but you are really advocating for the 85% of our staff who show up each and every day trying to do the best job they possibly can to keep our patients safe and well. So, a framework for a healthy workplace. Revisit all your policies and procedures. Ensure that they have common language, especially if you have gone through mergers and acquisitions where you have multiple campuses, each with their own HR policy and procedure manuals. And the likelihood of having common language might be low. You want to pull that all together and make sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. Ensure that there are clear examples of what your organization determines as an act of bullying or incivility, and give examples of those, such as the ANA referenced for you. And ensure that each document is referenced with publications from authoritative organizations in the industry, so that this is not something that's capricious and arbitrary and exclusive to your culture. This is a code of conduct that is expected from the collective healthcare industry and nursing profession. And then I encourage you to train like you're serious, which means that we no longer train on workplace, healthy work environment, or zero tolerance, or incivility, or the code of conduct once a year. This is something that's, if it's serious to your organization, the only way to really communicate how serious it is if you train like it's serious, which means I recommend training every 3 months. Find some topic to roll out to the organization, to your people, to your department on a quarterly basis. You can mix it up a little bit with some team steps approach and maybe some stress management, effective listening skills, having crucial conversations, mindfulness. You know, you can mix it up as much as you want to try to create some excitement around adult learning, but it always has to weave back to the fact that we are trying to create a culture of civility where we have zero tolerance for anything less.